Hello and welcome. Well, if you're expecting and or with a newborn baby and are looking for supportive breastfeeding tips and advice, well, you're in the right place. The role of the community that surrounds a new mother and how they choose to support their decision to breastfeed is vital. Generally, the greater amount of support the mother is given, the longer she is enabled and empowered to breastfeed, which in turn has greater health benefits for the baby. So today we welcome our special guest, Denise Condon, who is going to share helpful tips and advice which highlight the support that should be made available to new mums during the breastfeeding stage. Now, a little about our guest. Denise Condon is a lactation consultant at the Mater Private Hospital, one of Sydney's leading maternity hospitals. Now, Denise has more than 35 years' experience as a lactation consultant and as a midwife, and has delivered countless babies in her career. Now, she's also a member of the Lactation Consultants of Australia and New Zealand and the International Lactation Consultant Association. Thank you for joining us today, Denise. How are you?
Thank you. Hi, Rachel. Well, good. Thank you.
Excellent. And what an incredibly rewarding job you have, welcoming new life into the world every day and supporting new mums. And I mean, I just have to ask, what does that feel like going to work every day? It must be
Oh,
fantastic.
I suppose you could say, like it can be very busy. We're here at the Mater at North Sydney, but it is a wonderfully rewarding job and, constantly. And I suppose that's the thing, you do enjoy being part of that birthing experience. And, when new parents are getting to meet their new baby for the first time, I think we're very privileged to be able to share that experience with new parents. So it's a terribly rewarding position that working as a midwife, and I suppose for myself, the specialty area that I work with is supporting mums with breastfeeding
Yes.
in those in those early weeks. So yeah, look, it's a lovely, lovely job. And as you've said, I've done it for a very long time.
Over
Um,
35 years. That's incredible.
have a
And
number of four children of my own, and now a grandson. So it's a very
wonderful.
rewarding part of life. Yeah,
As you just mentioned, you work with mothers in the first few days with their
yeah.
newborn to establish a good breastfeeding pattern. So I'd love to know just initially, in your 35-year plus career, what are some of the most common challenges that you have found that new mums face, and what are your tips to overcome them? But starting with the physical, I'd just love to know initially.
Yeah, and look, I know we know we've delivered babies obviously forever, and you would say things don't change. But I suppose, what we do find for new mums, the challenges for new mums that we're seeing at the moment, like a lot of women, when they're coming into, deciding to be parents, they may have had a very challenging career. They're well established in their life. So now coming into that birthing experience, it can be challenging for them because it is a new world of not really knowing. They are very much, they've come from um, their working career might be something where they've been very organized and very structured for them. So now coming into this birthing experience, it can be challenging, not only, as you say, the physical side of things. It's just adapting to that new role that they have.
Mm.
And even the preparation we have for birthing, it really just is difficult for new mums to understand how it really is, can be a bit overwhelming. So the physical side is, a challenge for them. And then, getting to know their baby in those first couple of days. So it's a very new world.
And how about the mental challenges as well? I mean, are they all sort of all tied into one? How do you find that they sort of they differ from the physical challenges that a new mum faces in these initial first days?
Yeah, and look, I suppose again, going on one of the physical challenges is for mums is that obviously the sleep, being a bit, their sleep is now altered for them because their babies don't know about night and day. So that, not having control of that, from a mental, point of view, it is very challenging for them because they are suddenly sleep deprived, and how they're going to, cope with that. And even the preparation that they've done, it can be very difficult for them to, understand how they're going to adjust to that. But as you say, I think it's that change from where they've been. As I say, some of the mums can be very successful in their working lives, and now to be in a position where the baby is the one that's sort of controlling everything because they have to respond to the baby's needs. So it's very challenging for new mums, as I say, with that, not only the lack of sleep, their hormones are, responding to that new birth. So it can be very challenging for new mums,
And
definitely.
with that being said, then, so what tips and what supportive advice would you have to anyone watching and listening that is in this space at the moment in particular?
Um, Yeah, look, I think the important thing is mums to understand it takes time. It really does take time. And, we quite often talk about that 6 week period.
Yes.
It takes 6 weeks to recover from the birth from a physical point of view. It takes 6 weeks for that baby to sort of adjust from being in that beautiful, closeness to mum to now in the outside world. There's a lot of challenging times they're changing in that 6 week period, in that early stages. So it's important for mums to understand it takes time. It's not just a couple of days and yep, the birth is over. Now I've got my baby. And now what am I going to do? We've got to get to know the baby, learn the little baby's personality, and understand what's happening again for the mum as far as her physical state. The milk is coming in, she's recovering from the birth. She may have had a difficult delivery. She might be recovering from a cesarean. She might be recovering from having had stitches after the delivery. So it can be quite challenging for her in those, first couple of weeks. So the important thing for mums truly to understand is it takes time. And
And do you
some
find that a lot of mums sort of put a lot of pressure on themselves naturally during this time and that they can sort of start to have a little bit of anxiety also?
Exactly. And I suppose going back to that, when you say like a mental health thing, and I think that's sometimes where the challenges can be for mums, is they can, they are sort of wanting to get a little bit of a structure back into their
Of
lives
course.
with
Yep.
this baby. And they don't quite, it takes them time to understand that it's not going to happen in a couple of days.
Okay.
Even when they're in hospital, they sort of go, like, I want a bit of a routine. Well, look, you know, things will settle down for them, but their little baby, what they've really got to understand is to get to know their baby.
Yeah.
Um, so it is a challenge for new mums, and as well as their partners as well, because they're supporting their partners. So it is very much a very challenging time in those first early weeks. And for a lot of mums too, I know we do lots of preparation for the birthing, and for the labor, and we sort of know, how the pregnancy is going. But I think sometimes, and it's not that mums aren't getting that information about what happens when the baby's born, it's very difficult to anticipate how you're going to feel and what's actually going to be happening. So that preparation is very difficult for them to understand, I
Yes. Yeah.
think, how tiring it can be, and how dependent this little, baby is on them. So they are very much the challenges, for that new part, family.
And that being said, I mean, I guess what are the steps to successfully establishing breastfeeding and a good milk supply then? from a lactation consultant perspective?
So look, I think the most important thing, for mums that do want to breastfeed, and we know the stats in Australia say 98% of women choose to breastfeed their babies. So the important thing for mums to understand is making sure they give the babies the opportunity to get that first feed. So we know as soon as a baby is born, instinctively, the baby has the ability to come to the breast and start seeking out their first feed. And we talk about the magical hour, and we can actually see the baby respond instinctively to coming to the breast. So the importance of that first feed is really important for the mum establishing the breastfeed, and there's been a lot of research and evidence to say that that's true. So we would encourage mums to do skin to skin as soon as the baby is born.
Yep.
Try and keep the baby with them as much as possible. And look, we know that in some situations the baby and mother have to be separated for the health of the baby or the mother. But as long as we can have the opportunity of bringing that baby close to mum whenever possible. So establishing the baby at the first feed is really important. And then if we can't quite get the baby to the breast in that first hour or so, it's about like protecting the milk production. So we would encourage the mum to sort of feed as often as possible. And if she's not able to be feeding the baby, just make sure we're stimulating the milk production, because we know what happens when the baby is born. There's a sudden surge of hormones within the mum's body. The placenta's delivered, so we know there's a surge of hormones from the delivery of the placenta, which kicks in the milk production. So all those hormones are surging in the mum with anticipation of bringing in, producing the breast milk. So it's really important to get that first feed in, or if we can't get the first feed in, do as much skin to skin. And if the baby has to be separated for any reason, try and mums can express a little bit of their colostrum, which is the early milk. Try and do regular expressing until we can get that baby and mum together. Mm-hmm. So skin to skin is so important for the baby within the first days of establishing that breastfeeding.
And following on from that, how can a new mum tell if their baby is getting enough milk as well? Because no doubt this is something you obviously hear on a daily basis and is a concern for all new mums.
So it is the most asked question. And again, I think it's part of, we want to obviously, we want to make sure the baby's getting enough. We want to make sure that, the baby is getting what it needs. But we know in the first early days, the baby doesn't need a lot of...
the first 20 days, did you say? Sorry, Denise?
Early days.
Early days, sorry.
Yeah. So the colostrum is there in the first 3 days or so until the fullness of the milk comes. So it's not about volume, but it's about looking at your baby and trying to understand the cues the baby is giving you. So some of the things we'd be looking at is what goes in comes out. So what's in the baby's nappy? We want to check the baby's wee. We want to see how many poos the baby is doing. So in the early days, the midwife or the staff would be looking at that. But for a mum, when she goes home, when she's got fullness of milk, then we want to see at least 5 good wet nappies for a baby, and at least maybe a poo. We want the baby to be generally settled most of the time. We do know that babies can get unsettled during that, in the early days, but if they're generally settled, we know that they're probably getting enough. And things like putting on weight, babies initially will lose weight, but as long as the baby is putting on weight, we know that, that obviously the milk will be there. So it is one of the big things that mums are always questioning. If my baby is crying, does that mean my baby's hungry? So not necessarily. You need to sort of get to know your baby and listen to what your baby's telling you. is the important thing. So, and watching the baby's feeding cues is really important. Yeah.
But what about for the mothers that are having some problems with their babies latching? So what should mothers do if their baby's having trouble latching to the boob?
Yeah. So look, I suppose again, the thing is the skin to skin is really important because we know the baby is born with instinctive behavior which will help it come to the breast. So we talk about like, letting the baby sort of come to the breast, but for some mums, they like to position the baby at the breast themselves. And we want to make sure that the baby we talk about the baby being latched correctly. And if we've got the baby latched correctly, we know the baby is getting that milk like transfer. So the milk actually comes from the breast, not the nipple. So the positioning of the baby is really important to optimize that. Make sure that the baby is deeply on the breast. So if the mum is not sure whether she's latching the baby correctly, that's when she might need to seek out help. And in fact, if the baby's not latched correctly, she's not going to be, the baby's not latching, it's not getting the milk. If we're not producing the milk, we're not getting as much milk as we need. So a lot of the times it's about improving the latch, which will improve the milk supply. So if the mum is having trouble with the latch, she needs to probably seek advice and help, maybe from a lactation consultant. And that's actually why at the MARTA, we've actually now set up an outpatients clinic for mums that have delivered here, and they can actually make an appointment to come back and see us in the clinic up to 6 weeks so that we can actually check and see how things are going for them. Because again, one of the things that we do find is if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. So we want to make sure we've got the baby feeding well at the breast. And we talk to mum about what are some of the signs that we can identify that show us that the baby is feeding well, which is seeing,
Yeah, what are they?
yeah.
I'd love to know.
Yeah. So some of the things that we're looking at is making sure that the baby is, we talk about nutritively sucking. So quite often a mum will notice, or a mum that's breastfeeding, they'll notice that the baby, as they start to feed at the breast, they have good, we talk about nutritive sucking. So it's about like seeing some jaw movement in the baby where it
Yep.
actually gets mouthfuls of milk. And sometimes the baby will stop and then start again. So when we've got good nutritive sucking, we know that the baby's actually getting good milk transfer.
And
Sometimes
supply.
the baby, can do like non-nutritive, which is that little soft flutter sucking. And quite often mums can confuse the nutritive sucking to the non-nutritive. And that's what we need to sort of identify. And in fact, if the baby's doing non-nutritive sucking, it may not be getting as much milk, but it's actually, doing a little bit of comfort sucking. So it's important to identify that for the mum so she can actually see, how the feeding's going. And of course, the one thing about with latching is it painful. So, quite often mums will talk about they have nipple discomfort and pain when they're feeding. And we know initially that there can be a little bit of sensitivity with the nipples, but it shouldn't be really painful. And if it is painful, then we need to sort of look at what's happening with the positioning of the baby, the positioning of mum. And that's the importance of getting someone just have a look and see what's happening. And it can be something as simple as just changing the way mum's holding the baby, or just, giving her a few little tips about how she's managing that feed. And that truly, if we can get that sorted, it can actually help not only her milk supply, but the baby's feeding better, might be settling better. And again, longer breastfeeding for her in those, if she can get herself established with the baby feeding.
Hmm. And to date, I've been fortunate enough to have a few conversations with lactation consultants like yourself, and I've actually heard from memory that mums should tell me if this is correct, but
Yeah.
remember what side they fed on last. And for example, either having a bracelet or a hair elastic or something like that as
Yeah.
well to ensure that. So I'd love to know from your point of view, what are your tips with
Yeah.
balancing both sides with feeding?
Yeah. Well, I know there's plenty of apps out there as well. So that's
Yes, there are. Yes, yes, of course. Apps for everything.
yeah. And look, yeah, that's very important in those early days because we want to make sure that the baby is, taking milk from both breasts, which will even up the breasts. We don't want to be too lopsided. So if we can actually make sure that the baby feeds on the side that you finished, so when the baby comes to the breast, it's obviously hungrier and it will empty the breast. Well, and the breasts are never totally empty, but it will have a good feed from that side. And then give the baby the opportunity to be able to have a rest and digest, and it might come to the other side. It may not always feed as long on that second side as it did the first side. So when we come back to breastfeeding, we need to start the side that we finish on.
Why?
So,
I'd love to know why.
so the reason is, as I just said, so we can even the body up a bit because
Yeah.
you can actually sometimes have totally just breastfed off one breast. But again, it's they're going to be a bit lopsided. But it is very much about just making sure, I suppose, for the ease of the mum, is that she can actually be feeding off both breasts just to make herself more comfortable.
Right.
Um, Also, yeah. And also in those early days, we know the body is designed to feed that way, that the baby is getting, enough milk. But some mums actually have quite a lot of milk and they might actually find that their baby is only taking one breast at a time. So if that's the case, then obviously mum would then feed the side that the baby didn't feed on last time. If that makes, yeah, does that sort of,
Yep.
make sense that you can understand that
Yeah.
it is, yeah, about that mum's comfort as well. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now, I'd love to sort of to move on to now talking about the support and the community, as I referenced at the start of the chat today, and leading into that, we published your article on this
Yeah.
topic, and the title of that is "Breastfeeding: Receiving the Support You Deserve." Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, could you please tell us what it's about, and of course, just what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, look, I think again, part of establishing that breastfeeding is having that community around you to support that. And I think our life, in Western world, I suppose, we don't live amongst mums breastfeeding, and we're not so much that village. We need to have, but we do, to raise a child, we do not need that support around us. So if we've got, the partner on board, and that's why I think it's really important when we do the breastfeeding classes, it's important to have the partner there so they can understand what is happening for the mum so they can support them. For the family around, it's important for mum to be getting that rest she needs. If her wish is to breastfeed, only the mother can breastfeed. The support need to be able to support her with her choice, which if it is breastfeeding, and what she needs to do to, be able to achieve that, which is, if there's help that comes into the house, like meals, doing the housework, mums need to rest and sleep. And, if, as I say, if breastfeeding is what they want to do, their priority is making sure that they're able to do that. So, and even, I suppose, even getting past those first couple of weeks when they're out and about, we need, environments to be, I think, breastfeeding friendly. Mums need to be able, it is such a natural thing. We need women to be able to be breastfeeding, in public and not feeling that they need to be stepping away to do what is natural for their baby. Even if they choose to go back to work, we need to have environments that can support that, because I know a lot of the mums do need to be going back to work at a much earlier stage. And if breastfeeding is what they want to do, then we need to have working environments that can support that. So that is really important as well.
So in your article, you mentioned exactly on that topic that many women mistakenly think that they can't breastfeed if they plan to return to work after childbirth. However, you do mention in the article there are three key things that every employer should provide for them. The first one, for example, being space, that
Yeah.
the employer should be, or that the mother should be provided with the space and a private space to ensure that they can feed or express milk. The second one is time, that there should be enough a breastfeeding policy that clearly outlines the support for lactation breaks to allow time to feed and express during work hours. And the third one you mentioned in the article is just the support, that there should be a comprehensive communication strategy in place for everyone involved, just that outlines, I guess, the needs and just the considerations of breastfeeding for staff and mothers overall. So is there anything outside of those three tips that you'd like to maybe add at all?
Well, look, as you say, they are really important ones. And look, I know it can be very challenging for new mums going back to work, because they probably feel, like a bit of pressure. Oh, look, I can't take time off because, like it's, I've got to get the job done. In actual fact, we do have guidelines. There are, working guidelines. And in fact, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, the ABA, actually has on their website, they've got a return to work package that if mums are interested in, looking at those sort of support that can be available for them, to download that from their website. Because you should be able to, in most, like there is, workplace acts that do say that a mum can be able to breastfeed, and we want to like try and encourage that, because it is so important for mums, for some mums to continue with their breastfeeding journey even if they do have to return to work, because they know the benefits of breastfeeding, and the breast milk changes constantly as the baby is growing, getting older, and then what the breast milk provides is what the needs of the baby are at that time. So yeah, it's important for mums to look into what their I suppose what their
They're right
workplaces
to.
are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so what's in this toolkit that parents and mothers and employees should know about? What can you tell us about it?
Look, I think it's exactly that, just touching on those topics that you've talked about, but just giving them some guidelines about, the length of time I think you are allowed to take in a break for breastfeeding. Some workplaces actually do have set guidelines about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they need to sort of, if they're not quite sure what their workplace is providing for them, then they on this toolkit, on the ABA site, they will give them some information where they can research that.
Okay.
So
So if
um,
I'm hearing correctly, so employers are obliged by law to take reasonable measures to accommodate new mums' breastfeeding needs. Is that correct?
well, that is something that we're definitely making sure that, and again, like it is, I'm not sure if all workplaces take that on board,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that there would be a lot of government facilities that definitely, provide those. That sort of space for them. So
Okay.
that's have to you'd have to look into that, but there's definitely, a lot of changing regarding that.
So if anyone watching and listening, if you are on maternity leave and or are planning to return to work at some stage, all new mums should be sure to speak to your employer in advance about accessing this toolkit. And of course, we'll have a link in the show notes as well. Now, what
Yeah.
about, I guess, when the child is old enough to start childcare and or is in long day care, even as a newborn also? Can you maybe just expand on this a little bit more? Because I understand that parents can make arrangements with their childcare provider. Tell me if this is correct or not, to allow them to keep breastfeeding by either breastfeeding the child in the childcare facility, and or allowing the mother to be able to provide expressed milk for them,
Correct.
for the educators to be able to feed the child whilst they're in childcare. Is that correct or incorrect?
right. Yeah, and that's what all childcare facilities. So if your childcare facility is not allowing that, you need to actually speak to them and sort of, make sure that is, well, that's what I mean, seek out a childcare that is, but all childcare centres, I would believe should be able to provide that facility for mums that are wishing to breastfeed. So yeah, it's definitely something that you need to talk to your childcare facility about.
And you do mention in the article that
Sorry?
a
Yeah.
childcare provider cannot refuse your application as a mother for a childcare place because your child is breastfed. Your childcare provider cannot ask you to stop breastfeeding when your child is in care, and must allow you to be able to express milk on the premises. Is that correct?
Well, look, I would have to, I can't say 100%, but I would say that I would only be looking at a childcare centre that makes those arrangements.
Yes.
Of course, that is really important for mums to be able to provide that. They need to provide a space for the mum to, store her breast milk as well. So they need to, while the mum's at work, obviously they would bring in the breast milk. So they need to have a facility there. So I would definitely be looking at making sure your facility that you use is able to do that for you. Because if that's something you want to continue with, you definitely need to make sure you speak to them about that.
Mhm. Okay. And finally, I just wanted to touch on, I guess, the support that a partner would be giving a mother during the breastfeeding journey. We've spoken about the community and the village around the mother, supporting on all aspects from friends, family, of course, childcare providers, employers, but the most important person, I guess, in the community is the right hand person to that, to the mother, is the partner, of course. So in the article, you actually list your 5 tips a partner can show their how they can show their support during the breastfeeding journey. I'd love to just go through those sort of just now. Could you maybe just expand on those just for a moment? The first one that you do mention is just understanding the importance of breastfeeding. The breastfeeding is normal in that respect. So you can maybe just expand on that a little bit for the moment.
And again, that's why that's why I think it's so important for partners to be involved in understanding the breastfeeding journey and understanding how it works. I suppose one of the things that we sort of try and make sure the partners are aware that the baby doesn't work on a night and day clock,
Yes.
sadly. And the milk production is highest at night time. So the babies do a lot of breastfeeding at night time because babies are quite nocturnal. And I think as a partner, what they want to do is support they want to support the mum and her breastfeeding, but of course they're concerned about her sleeping and trying to rest. So there are some partners that sort of feel like, oh, maybe we could let mum sleep and try and, feed the baby another way during the night. But if the mum wants to breastfeed, she needs to be able to, understand that breastfeeding at nighttime is very important. Breastfeeding at nighttime happens a lot and it's normal. And that's why it's important for partners to understand the importance of breastfeeding and what is normal about it, because things are changing all the time. And I think that part of it, understanding that the baby doesn't have that circadian rhythm that we have that makes us sleep at night and awake during the day. So we have to remember and, make sure the partners understand that, it's important for mum to be breastfeeding at night if
Mhm.
that's what she wants to be doing. And then supporting the mum during the day if she can, to be resting when the baby's sleeping
And
is
also, you
important.
mentioned to refrain from suggesting formula at the signs of any sort of initial difficulty. Also, as we mentioned at the start of the chat, the longer and I guess the greater amount of support that the mother's given, the longer that they will breastfeed, which has greater long term benefits for the baby. Do you find that a lot of partners do suggest an easy and I'm not saying that formula is
Yeah,
an easier
no,
way out, but um,
exactly. And look, it's only because they are concerned for their partner. It's only because they feel that if they can let her have the sleep, then, we can, help her. But in actual fact, as I say, going back to breastfeeding, more breastfeeding means more milk. If we've got more milk, then it's going to satisfy the baby. So by introducing some sort of supplement, it actually does sort of then affect the milk production. Either she may not produce as much, she can run into different issues if she's not emptying her breasts. Mums talk about mastitis and those sorts of things. So quite often what I will say to the partners, if mum wants to breastfeed, mum's got the breasts, she needs to breastfeed. What the partner can do, and in fact the feeding side of it does not take that long, particularly once she's got that breastfeeding established. They can change the nappy, they can help at bath time, they can make sure that mum's comfortable, support her with drink and water. And if the baby is unsettled after the feed, then they need to maybe, try and do a little bit of settling, because the feeding part is the easy part. So I think it's, as you say, like educating the partners is to understand how best to support the mother if breastfeeding is what she wants to do.
And the support also can just be mental support, just telling you that you think that you're doing a great job and that you're proud of her, and just encourage words of encouragement also, would you say?
Exactly, because a lot of times the mums are not quite, they're still getting to know their babies. Am I doing the right thing? They're always, which is only natural. We want to, if our baby's unsettled, what am I doing that's making my baby unsettled? I think it's understand, we've got to constantly reassure her. And look, they do an amazing job, all new mums. And by having a partner that is encouraging her and supporting her in her choice, and quite often I even say to the partners, like, look at mum and the way she's feeding. Your partner, does she look comfortable? If she doesn't look comfortable, then you need to assist her to be comfortable in her breastfeeding. So that's a great job that the partner can do as well, is supporting her by just looking at her and understanding, does she need to have a little bit of a break, or what does she need? So it is very much important to be aware of that as a partner, just that encouragement about what a great job they're doing, because sometimes that's all they need.
And also to be patient with the mum's emotions also, which you do mention, just to simply just to listen to your partner, and just to be there and show support sometimes as well is extremely important, but to have patience along the way, would you say?
Exactly, because look, and I know it's hard for the partner who's gone through the journey of the pregnancy, and we know all the emotions that's involved in there. But not only have we got the hormonal emotions sort of on board, as well as the lack of sleep that comes with new parenting, both for both the partner as well as the mum. But
Hmm.
it's really important that we're aware that she can, mum can be a bit up and down. And truly, I always say, one day at a time. If a mum has a really bad day, just forget about that day, because tomorrow's a new day. And let's just deal with tomorrow when it comes. Because quite often, mums will get themselves quite worked up about, how am I going to manage tomorrow, because I'm so exhausted and tired today. So, pretty much one feed at a time and one day at a time.
And showing support, not even just emotionally, but doing things around the home where you can as well. And also just as a mother is sitting there breastfeeding, ensuring that she does have snacks and water at her disposal in close proximity as well, would you say?
Exactly. And that's the thing, looking at those babies, talk about the baby's feeding cues. If we've got a baby that's starting to look like it might be needing a feed soon, like, when did mum last have something to eat? When, even going to the bathroom, all those sorts of things. Because when she comes down to do her feed, in the early days, it's probably going to take her about an hour, to do that breastfeed. So what support does she need while that's happening?
So all of this emotional support, support around the home, and of course, support doesn't just stop like at home, obviously when you're out and about, also to be able to support your partner when she is breastfeeding your baby in public as well. So rather than suggesting covering up or going somewhere else to nurse, it is something that that mother needs continual support outside the home as well, would you say?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think the thing is, breastfeeding is natural. And we need to sort of, let mums know that it is natural. You don't really have to cover up. And let the partners understand that, it's what the baby needs. It's part of what you're doing. And, if we all sort of are thinking that way, it is, makes it easier for mum to understand, look, I'm just going to breastfeed because this is what my baby needs at the moment. So it's important to understand, it is a natural thing for the baby to be feeding in
Yes.
public. So, and places need to be aware about that as well.
Denise, this has been a really insightful, informative, and helpful chat. I would love for you just to summarize, I guess, what your key messages are for anyone watching and listening.
Yeah, and look, I think the most important things I always do say when I talk to mums is listen to your baby. Your baby will tell you what it wants. Trust your instincts because you're going to be right. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. And you need to seek help when you sort of are not sure what's happening. And the way you can do that is there's early childhood centres, the Australian Breastfeeding Association. As I said, here at the Mater, we've actually just set up an outpatient clinic where the mums can come back and see us here in that first 6 weeks if they need some extra support. So the thing to understand is it does take at least 6 weeks for everything just to start to settle down. It's going to take a lifetime because we've got those those babies that'll be children and adults. But once we become a parent, always a parent. But it does take time to understand what's happening with this new little person. And the other thing is we've got to get to know that little personality, because all babies are different, and what's happening with you and your baby is different from your girlfriend down the road or the cousin or
Very
something
important
else.
to know and understand
Yeah,
that.
and I always say
Mm.
to mums, take all the information on board, work out what works for you. It's you, your baby, and your partner. That the three of you have to work out what works for you, because there's no right and there's no wrong. It's what works for you. So you can take all the information on board and you have to work out what sits well with you. As long as you understand what a healthy baby looks like, and make sure if you feel you need support, you reach out and get it. So just be aware of where your support is in
Mhm.
the community.
Thank you for that. And look, we'll include all of the helpful links in the show notes, including the information and the contact number for the Australian Breastfeeding Association and the National Breastfeeding Helpline. And also link to the Australian Breastfeeding Association's comprehensive return to work called a toolkit. We'll have that as well as a link to the article. But so grateful for your time today, Denise. And once again, very grateful for all the information that you've shared and the wisdom. And really hope the opportunity to speak to you again in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, take care and stay safe. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you so much, Rachel, and
All
all
right.
the best.
Okay. Bye.